All right, let's talk about a phrase. A neat, tidy little phrase that gets thrown around like a lexicographical hand grenade. A woman is an adult human female. It's presented, isn't it, with such an air of unassailable, objective truth. You can almost hear the satisfying of a dictionary closing after it's uttered, as if to say, well, that's that settled then. Argument over. Let's all go home and enjoy some light bigotry. It's the kind of definition that, if it were a piece of furniture, would be aggressively minimalist, probably uncomfortable, and definitely from IKEA, requiring a tiny Allen key of understanding that, frankly, many people seem to have lost. At first glance, it sounds scientific. Simple, clean, binary, like something you'd find on a flashcard in a particularly uninspired biology class. Right next to the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and water is wet, mostly. It's designed to sound definitive, to shut down further inquiry. Adult, check. Human, well, yes, hopefully, female. And there's the rub, isn't it? Because that one word, female, is doing an awful lot of heavy lifting, and it's buckling under the pressure like a unicycle carrying a grand piano. But the reality is more complex. And when you dig into the science, the actual, fascinating and often beautifully messy science, you'll find that this definition doesn't just exclude trans women. It fails to account for many CIS women too. It's less a scientific definition and more like a bouncer at an exclusive club who's got a very specific and frankly rather arbitrary dress code. And tonight we're going to examine that dress code, question the bouncer's credentials, and maybe, just maybe, suggest the club could be a lot more interesting with a more inclusive door policy. So, this whole adult human female thing hinges massively on the idea that female is this singular, easily identifiable and universally consistent biological state. Like a light switch, it's either on, female, or off, male. Simple, right? Except, biology, bless its cotton socks, rarely does simple. It's more like a dimmer switch with a faulty connection, occasionally flickering in unexpected ways, and sometimes installed by a contractor who was clearly winging it. The assumption baked into adult human female is that there's one definitive biological marker, a sort of golden ticket of femaleness that all women have and all men lack. But here's the kicker, there isn't one. Not a single one. Think about it. Is it chromosomes? XX for female, XY for male? Well, we'll get into that more later, but spoiler alert, it's not that straightforward. There are cisgender women with XY chromosomes and cisgender men with XX chromosomes. Is it the ability to produce eggs? What about women who are postmenopausal, or women who've had hysterectomies, or women born without ovaries or with underdeveloped ones? Are they suddenly ejected from club womanhood? According to this rigid definition, they might be, which is, to put it mildly, absurd. Then there's the matter of hormones. Estrogen is often cited as female hormone. But men also produce estrogen just as women produce testosterone. The levels and ratios differ, sure, but it's not an exclusive ownership situation. It's more like a shared Spotify account. Everyone's got access, even if some listen to more Taylor Swift than others. To suggest that a specific hormonal profile is the sole determinant of female is to ignore the vast spectrum of natural hormonal variations that exist within the population, both male and female. It's like saying only people with exactly 20/20 vision are truly sighted. And what about secondary sex characteristics? Things like breast development or hip-to-waist ratio. These are influenced by hormones and genetics, yes, but they vary enormously among women. Some women have small breasts, some have large breasts. Some women have wider hips, some have narrower hips. Are we going to start handing out female cards based on cup size or a tailor's measuring tape? That sounds less like science and more like a slightly creepy casting call for a very specific and probably quite dull movie. The diversity is the point, not an exception to be explained away. Consider intersex individuals, people born with sex characteristics, be they chromosomes, gonads, sex hormones, or genitals, that don't fit neatly into typical binary notions of male or female bodies. Where do they fit into this adult human female equation? The existence of intersex people, estimated to be as common as people with red hair, fundamentally challenges the idea that sex is a strict binary. This isn't a new discovery. It's a biological reality that this simplistic definition conveniently ignores, sweeping a significant portion of humanity under the rug. The truth is, female as a biological category is a constellation of traits, not a single star. For any one biological indicator you pick, be it chromosomes, gonads, hormones, or reproductive capacity, you will find cisgender women who do not fit the supposed norm for that indicator, yet are undeniably women. Their womanhood isn't diminished by their biological variance. To insist on a single, narrow biological definition is to misunderstand biology itself, which thrives on variation. It's like trying to define bird by saying it flies, and then getting really confused by penguins and ostriches. So when someone confidently asserts adult human female as the be-all and end-all definition, they are, whether they realize it or not, building their entire argument on a foundation that's about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. They're presenting a complex, multifaceted biological reality as a simple two-option checkbox. And as we'll see, this isn't just scientifically inaccurate. It's a rhetorical move designed to exclude, not to clarify. It's less about understanding biology and more about policing boundaries. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Nicole, you're making some points, but you're just one person with a YouTube channel and a surprisingly well-researched script. What do the experts say? The people in white coats with clipboards, who presumably know a chromosome from a croissant? And that's a fair question. So let's consult the scientific and medical Avengers, shall we? Because when it comes to understanding human biology, particularly the complexities of sex and gender, their consensus is pretty clear, and it doesn't exactly align with the adult human female bumper sticker. First up, the Endocrine Society, which is, and I quote, the world's oldest, largest, and most active organization devoted to research on hormones and the clinical practice of endocrinology. Basically, they're the undisputed heavyweights of hormone knowledge. They state that sex is not strictly binary, and that there are individuals who identify as a gender different from the sex they were assigned at birth. They emphasize the importance of distinguishing between sex assigned at birth and gender identity, something the adult human female mantra conveniently bulldozes over. They're not mincing words. They're saying biology is more nuanced than a two-column spreadsheet. Then we have one of the most prestigious scientific journals on the planet. You know, the kind of publication that doesn't just print articles about your cat's weird obsession with cardboard boxes. In an editorial stated that the idea that science neatly divides humanity into male and female is wrong. They explicitly discussed how the research and medical community now sees sex as a spectrum, not a binary. It's like the difference between a coloring book with only 2 crayons and one with the full 64 crayon box, including burnt sienna, which, let's be honest, is the MVP of crayons. Let's not forget the American Medical Association, AMA, the largest association of physicians and medical students in the United States. They've been quite vocal, advocating for policies that recognize gender identity and opposing discrimination. They understand that a doctor's job is to treat the patient in front of them, respecting their identity and their lived experience, not to rigidly enforce an outdated biological checklist. The AMA has supported removing sex designations from birth certificates, recognizing that such binary markers can be inaccurate and harmful. They're essentially saying, this simple label isn't cutting it, folks. And what about global health authorities? The World Health Organization, WHO, for instance, defines gender as referring to the socially constructed characteristics of women and men, such as norms, roles, and relationships of and between groups of women and men. It varies from society to society and can be changed. They explicitly separate gender from biological sex and acknowledge its social and cultural dimensions. The adult human female crowd often tries to conflate sex and gender into one immutable biological lump, but the WHO, among others, says, not so fast, buddy. Even the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has weighed in, repeatedly affirming the rights of transgender people and calling for an end to discrimination based on gender identity. They recognize that attempts to rigidly define sex and gender in exclusionary ways lead to human rights violations. They're not just talking about hurt feelings. They're talking about fundamental rights to dignity, equality, and freedom from discrimination. This isn't just an academic debate. It has real-world consequences for people's lives and safety. So when proponents of adult human female claim they're just speaking biological truth, they are in fact contradicting a vast body of scientific and medical consensus. It's like insisting the Earth is flat while standing in a NASA control room. These organizations aren't driven by ideology. They're driven by evidence, by research, and by a commitment to understanding the human condition in all its complexity. They've looked at the data, and the data says it's complicated. The takeaway here is that the people who dedicate their lives to studying human biology, health, and rights are largely in agreement. Sex is not a simple binary, and gender is a distinct concept. The adult human female definition isn't just out of step with this understanding, it's actively trying to drag us back to a less informed, less compassionate era. It's like trying to navigate a modern city with a map drawn in the 17th century. You're going to miss a lot, and you're probably going to end up in a ditch. All right, let's dive into the genetic argument, because this is a big one for the adult human female brigade. It's simple, they cry. X means female, XY means male, science. And if science were indeed that simple, we'd all have jetpacks by now and my job would be a lot easier. But alas, it's not. The XXY binary is a vast oversimplification, and to understand why, we need to talk about two crucial concepts, genotype and phenotype. Fancy words, I know, but stick with me, it's less complicated than assembling flat-pack furniture. Genotype refers to your genetic makeup, the specific set of genes you inherit, like the blueprint for a house. Phenotype, on the other hand, refers to your observable characteristics, how those genes are actually expressed, what the house like once it's built. And just like a blueprint can be interpreted in different ways or encounter unexpected issues during construction, your genotype doesn't always translate into a predictable phenotype in the way simplistic models suggest. There can be variations in how genes are read and expressed. A classic example of this is androgen insensitivity syndrome, or AIS. Individuals with AIS have XY chromosomes, which, according to the simplistic XY equals sign male rule, should mean they develop as typically male. However, their bodies are partially or completely unable to respond to androgens, the hormones like testosterone that drive masculinization. So despite having an XY genotype, their phenotype, their physical characteristics, can be entirely female. They develop female external genitalia, breasts, and often identify as women. They are, for all intents and purposes, women. So if you walked up to a woman with complete AIS and said, "Excuse me, madam, but according to your chromosomes, you are not, in fact, an adult human female," you would not only be incredibly rude, but also scientifically ignorant. You'd be prioritizing an internal invisible genetic marker over the lived, visible, and experienced reality of her body and identity. It's like looking at a perfectly baked cake and insisting it's actually a pile of flour and eggs because you've seen the recipe. The outcome? The phenotype matters. This isn't some vanishingly rare exception either. Variations in sex development, sometimes called differences of sex development or DSDs, are more common than many people realize. There are people with XX chromosomes who develop as male, for example, XX male syndrome, often due to the SRY gene translocating to an X chromosome. There are people with mosaic genetics, meaning some of their cells have one chromosomal makeup, like XX, and others have a different one, like XY. Biology is a wild and wonderful tapestry, not a neat checkerboard. The adult human female definition, by rigidly clinging to an oversimplified chromosomal model, effectively erases the existence and experiences of these women. It says to a woman with AIS, "Sorry, your entire life, your body, your identity, it's all a biological error according to our narrow definition. This isn't just pedantic, it's deeply invalidating and harmful. It prioritizes a microscopic detail over a macroscopic reality. It's like arguing someone isn't truly a driver because their car has an automatic transmission instead of a manual. The point is, chromosomes are part of the story of sex development, but they're not the whole story. They're an instruction manual that can sometimes have missing pages, extra pages, or pages that the body interprets in unexpected ways. Phenotype, the actual physical characteristics and development of an individual, is a critically important aspect of biological sex. And when we look at phenotype, the picture becomes far richer and more varied than a simple XXY binary allows. The adult human female definition fails because it ignores this crucial distinction, opting for a false simplicity. Chapter 4. Biology isn't static, the real changes in trans women's bodies. Now, a frequent retort from the adult human female camp, when confronted with the complexities we've discussed, is to pivot and say something like, well, trans women aren't female, they just as women. This argument attempts to draw a firm line, suggesting that while gender identity might be fluid, biological sex is fixed at birth and immutable. But here's where things get interesting, because if biology the main event for these folks, then they need to acknowledge that biology can, and does, change. Especially for trans women who undergo medical transition. When a trans woman undertakes hormone therapy, typically involving estrogen and often androgen blockers, her body undergoes significant, tangible biological changes. This isn't just wishful thinking or cosmetic tinkering, it's a profound physiological shift. We're talking about the development of secondary sex characteristics that are aligned with female biology. Fat redistribution occurs, leading to changes in body shape, softer skin, and often breast development. This isn't superficial. It's driven by hormonal action at a cellular level, the same way puberty works. Muscle mass tends to decrease, and body hair may become finer and sparser. Internally, there are changes too. Hormone therapy can affect bone density, metabolism, and even, some research suggests, brain structure and function over time, aligning them more closely with patterns typically seen in cisgender women. To dismiss these as not real biological changes is to fundamentally misunderstand how hormones shape our bodies throughout our lives. Puberty isn't a one-time event. Our bodies are constantly responding to hormonal signals. The argument that these changes are artificial and therefore don't count is also a curious one. Is a diabetic person's insulin artificial? Is a pacemaker artificial? Is hormone replacement therapy for postmenopausal cisgender women artificial? We use medical interventions to alter biology all the time to improve health and well-being. If a cisgender woman takes estrogen for medical reasons, her biology is affected. If a trans woman takes estrogen, her biology is affected, and in ways that move her phenotype closer to that typically associated with cisgender women. If the adult human female proponents are so insistent on biology being the ultimate arbiter, then they must contend with the biological reality of medical transition. They can't have it both ways. They can't say biology is everything, and then ignore the biological changes that hormone therapy induces. It's like saying a caterpillar that undergoes metamorphosis into a butterfly is still biologically a caterpillar, just with wings. No, the process of metamorphosis is a profound biological transformation. Furthermore, the focus on natal or birth sex as the only relevant biological marker is incredibly limiting. Our biology is not frozen at the moment of birth. It's a dynamic process. We grow, we age, we experience puberty, some experience pregnancy, we go through menopause. All of these are biological changes. To single out the biological changes experienced by trans women as somehow illegitimate or irrelevant, while accepting all other forms of biological change, is inconsistent and frankly looks a lot like motivated reasoning. So if the argument is truly about biology, then the biological effects of feminizing hormone therapy on trans women are undeniably relevant. These changes are real, they are profound, and they result in a body that is, in many significant respects, biologically female in its characteristics and functioning. To ignore this is not to uphold science, but to selectively apply it in a way that serves a predetermined conclusion, the exclusion of trans women. It's a bit like a referee who only calls fouls on one team. Chapter 5, The Baby-Making Machine. Fallacy reproduction isn't womanhood's VIP pass. Another cornerstone of the adult human-female argument, often whispered or shouted depending on the venue, is the idea of reproductive capacity. The argument essentially goes, females are the sex that can produce ova and gestate offspring. Therefore, If you can't do that, you're not truly female, and by extension, not a woman. This definition is not only incredibly narrow and exclusionary, but it also has some rather alarming implications for a whole lot of cisgender women if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, which it seems many proponents of this view have not. Let's start with the obvious. Many cisgender women cannot or do not reproduce. There are women who are infertile due to a myriad of medical conditions. There are women who have had hysterectomies or oophorectomies for health reasons, like preventing cancer or treating endometriosis. There are women who are postmenopausal. Their reproductive years are behind them. Are these women no longer adult human females? Are they somehow lesser women? Has their woman card been revoked by their own biology? Of course not. That would be an absurd and deeply offensive assertion. To define womanhood by the potential to give birth reduces women to their reproductive organs, a trope that feminists have been fighting against for centuries. It's an incredibly reductive view, suggesting that a woman's primary value or defining characteristic is her womb. It's like defining a chef solely by whether they own a specific brand of saucepan, ignoring their skills, their creativity, their passion, and the delicious food they produce. A woman is so much more than her capacity, or lack thereof, to bear children. And what about girls who haven't reached puberty yet? They can't produce mature ova or gestate. Are they not female until their first period? That's clearly nonsensical. The adult human female definition usually includes adult, but the underlying female equals potential to gestate logic often gets applied inconsistently. The focus on potentiality is also tricky. If a woman could have children but chooses not to, or is with a female partner, does her potential still count, while an infertile woman's lack of potential disqualifies her? The logic starts to eat its own tail. Furthermore, this reproductive essentialism conveniently ignores the fact that not all men can produce sperm or impregnate someone. Male infertility is a significant issue. Does this mean infertile men are not adult human males? By the same rigid biological reproductive logic, it would seem so. Yet you rarely hear this argument being made with the same fervor. It's almost as if the focus on reproductive capacity is selectively applied to police the boundaries of womanhood, rather than being a consistent biological principle. The idea that the sole defining feature of female across the entire animal kingdom is the production of larger gametes, ova, versus smaller gametes, sperm, is a biological observation about sexual reproduction at a very basic level, but to then take that observation and use it as a prescriptive, all-encompassing definition for human womanhood in a complex social context is a massive, unwarranted leap. It ignores everything else we know about human biology, identity, and society. It's like saying because humans are mammals, our defining characteristic is having fur, and then getting very confused by dolphins. Ultimately, tying womanhood inextricably to reproductive capability is not only scientifically flawed when applied to individuals, but it's also ethically problematic. It devalues women who cannot or choose not to have children, and it props up an outdated patriarchal view of women as primarily vessels for procreation. Womanhood is far richer, far more diverse, and far more personal than that. It's not a factory setting, it's a lived experience, and that experience isn't contingent on ovulation. Chapter 6, The Not-So-Hidden Agenda, What Adult Human Female is Really For. So, if adult human female isn't a scientifically robust or consistently applicable definition, and if it excludes many cisgender women as well as transgender women, then what, you might reasonably ask, is it actually for? Why the passionate, almost religious adherence to this particular string of words? Well, when a definition doesn't accurately describe reality, but is nonetheless fiercely defended, it's often because it's serving a different purpose. And in this case, that purpose appears to be less about biological accuracy and more about gatekeeping. The phrase adult human female is wielded not as a tool for understanding, but as a weapon for exclusion. It's a verbal barrier designed to keep trans women out of spaces, categories, and rights associated with womanhood. It's an attempt to draw a bright, uncrossable line in the sand based on a narrow and often misrepresented interpretation of biology. The goal isn't to clarify who women are in all their diversity, but to rigidly define who cannot be a woman, specifically trans women. It's like putting up a no-G_names allowed sign and then claiming it's just about accurate labeling. Think about the contexts in which this phrase is most frequently and aggressively used. It's rarely in good faith discussions about biological diversity. Instead, it's a rallying cry in debates about trans rights, about access to women-only spaces, about participation in sports, and about legal recognition. It's deployed to invalidate trans women's identities, to deny them services, and to argue against their inclusion. The insistence on this specific definition becomes a way to say you don't belong under a veneer of objective scientific language. This tactic is particularly insidious because it co-opts the language of science to promote an exclusionary agenda. By framing their argument as just biology, proponents can dismiss concerns about discrimination and prejudice as feelings or ideology trumping facts. But as we've seen, their facts are often selective, oversimplified, or directly contradicted by mainstream scientific understanding. It's a classic bait-and-switch promise, a scientific discussion, deliver a political ultimatum. It's like a Trojan horse, but instead of Greek soldiers, it's full of bad faith arguments and a surprising amount of transmisogyny. Moreover, this gatekeeping isn't just about trans women. By promoting such a rigid and narrow definition of female, it inadvertently, or perhaps for some conveniently, reinforces restrictive norms for all women. If womanhood is reduced to a specific set of biological criteria, often centered on reproductive capacity or stereotypical femininity, it can marginalize any woman who doesn't fit that precise mold. It pushes back against the broader, more inclusive understandings of womanhood that feminists have fought for decades to achieve. The very act of demanding a single, simple biological definition for a complex human category like woman is itself revealing. Why is there such an urgent need to police this particular boundary so fiercely? It often stems from fear of change, fear of the unfamiliar, fear of losing a perceived status or privilege. But defining people out of existence or out of their rights is not a solution to anything. It's an act of social exclusion dressed up in a lab coat that's several sizes too small. Ultimately, adult human female functions as a political slogan, not a scientific axiom. It's designed to end conversations, not to start them. It's about drawing lines, not building bridges. It's about who gets to be in and who must remain out. And when a definition is used primarily to exclude and deny, rather than to describe and understand the rich tapestry of human experience, it's a pretty good sign that the definition itself is the problem, not the people it seeks to marginalize. Chapter 7. Beyond the biological blueprint, womanhood as lived reality. So if adult human female is a flawed and exclusionary definition, what's the alternative? How do we understand what it means to be a woman? The answer, much like biology itself, is more complex and multifaceted than a three-word slogan. Womanhood is not merely a checklist of biological traits. It is also a social role, a profound personal identity, and a way of navigating and experiencing the world. To reduce it to chromosomes or reproductive organs is to miss the vast majority of what constitutes being a woman for most women. Think about it. When we talk about women's experiences, are we solely talking about menstruation or childbirth? Or are we talking about shared social realities like navigating sexism, forming communities, experiencing certain societal expectations, for better or worse, and forging identities in a world that often treats women in specific ways? These are all part of the tapestry of womanhood, and they are not strictly dictated by whether one has XX chromosomes or the capacity to produce ova. Trans women share many of these social experiences as women. Identity is a crucial component. A person's internal sense of self, their gender identity, is a fundamental aspect of who they are. For trans women, their identity as women is not a whim or a preference. It is a deeply felt core part of their being. To deny this identity based on a narrow biological definition is to invalidate their very existence. And science, including psychology and psychiatry, increasingly recognizes the importance and validity of gender identity. It's not something you can just logic someone out of with a dictionary. Furthermore, Womanhood is a life lived. It's the sum of experiences, relationships, challenges, and triumphs encountered while moving through the world as a woman. This lived experience shapes who you are. For trans women, this includes the experience of being recognized by others as women, of being treated as women, and of building a life as women. This social aspect of gender is incredibly powerful. If society largely perceives and interacts with you as a woman, that profoundly shapes your reality as a woman. This isn't to say biology is irrelevant. Biology is part of the picture for everyone, trans and cis alike. As we've discussed, trans women can and do experience biological changes that align their bodies with their female identity. But biology is not the only part of the picture, nor is it a simple, universally agreed upon determinant for who counts as a woman in our society. To insist it is to ignore the lived realities of millions. It's like insisting a book is only its cover, or a song is only its first note. Any definition of woman that excludes trans women is, by its very nature, incomplete and flawed. And as we've seen, a definition as rigid as adult human female also ends up excluding or problematizing the womanhood of many cisgender women, those who are infertile, postmenopausal, intersex, or who simply don't conform to narrow biological stereotypes. A definition that fails so many of the people it purports to describe isn't a very useful definition, is it? It's like a colander trying to hold soup. Ultimately, a more accurate and inclusive understanding of womanhood recognizes that it is a complex interplay of biology in all its diversity, gender identity, social experience, and lived reality. It's not about finding one single essential trait, but about acknowledging the multifaceted nature of what it means to be a woman. Trans women are women. Cis women are women. Womanhood is diverse, and that diversity is a strength, not a problem to be defined away. Moving beyond the slogan embracing reality. So, where does that leave us with adult human female? Well, hopefully, it leaves us seeing it for what it is, not a scientific trump card, but a rhetorical dead end. It's a phrase that sounds authoritative but crumbles under even the slightest scrutiny of actual biology and lived experience. It's an attempt to build a very small, very exclusive clubhouse, and frankly, the membership criteria are not just arbitrary, they're actively harmful to a lot of people, both inside and outside the trans community. The truth is, sex is a spectrum. Biology is not binary. Womanhood is diverse. These aren't radical statements. They are increasingly supported by scientific understanding and a more compassionate view of human existence. The world is beautifully complex, and our definitions need to reflect that complexity, not try to bulldoze it into simplistic, ill-fitting boxes. Trying to force everyone into two neat categories based on an oversimplified understanding of 7th grade biology just isn't going to cut it anymore. We know more now, we should do better. Trans women are women, not in spite of science, but in alignment with it, when it refers to the comprehensive modern understanding of biology, psychology, and social reality. The phrase, woman equals adult human female, is not biology, it's branding. And it's time we move beyond it, towards a more inclusive, accurate, and ultimately more human understanding of what it means to be a woman in all her forms. Because a world that embraces diversity is a richer, more interesting, and frankly, a much less tedious world for everyone.